Hello YouTube, and specifically this video is directed to Dragon God Thunder, Thunder God Pray is the username. This is pertaining to a particular segment of Inmendum's video, What the Fuck, number 482, Facts Are Reason, which, by the way, points towards, for example, Inmendum's explanation of logic, basically as the additive process of compiling the facts of reality. Logic is not something that is divorced from empiricism, is what I would say, in the sense that logic is simply the process, as Inmendum has analogized, connecting the dots of evidence. Explained in other words, adding facts together, so that's the if to the then. Within the if-then logical sequence, for instance, is how you could explain it in a simplified manner. If this is a fact and this is a fact, then this is the logical conclusion based on those facts. So as long as you have your facts, your premises, etc., as long as they are accurate, then your logical conclusions are going to be sound. Your logic is going to be well-founded. It is going to actually be logical, as long as you are basing them in accurate facts, sufficiently verified facts, and you are consistently drawing the line of connection between those facts to see where that direction ends, to see what the conclusion is based exclusively on those facts. Anyhow, the substance of this video is going to be centered around this thread. Because of the language barrier, I'm going to attempt to simplify some of the communication here. And anyone that is interested can go to this thread. Dragon God Thunder did initiate the original post, so as long as, for example, he does not remove it, this should still be viewable. Now I'm going to flip to the audio from around the 10-minute 45 mark, is where the relevant points that Dragon God commented on are expressed in the video. I'm going to speed it up just for the sake of efficiency.
And, there is some of that involved here. Playing these silly superiority games when, there's supposed to be a principle involved somewhere. So, it's like, that's why it didn't even bother me when Half a Day titles a video that Inmendum's not a vegan or a vegetarian. I mean, clearly, I've said before, I will eat stuff. If somebody gives me a 10-year-old can of tuna fish, because they're not going to eat it, they're going to throw it out, then I'll eat it. There's no point in wasting the dead organisms.
Decided to pause there because that is something relevant to part of my comments. His point about it being seen as squandered. Their suffering squandered because once torture and murdering of the sentient organism has already occurred, and the process of converting that dead organism into a edible form for human consumption, and it is going to be thrown out or discarded. Not only were they tortured, brutally murdered in inhumane fashion with, for example, factory farming practices, but the supposed purpose of that being for human consumption is not even going to happen. It's literally, if you're not even feeding anyone, it's completely wasteful. Less justified than if at least a human would have consumed that animal and therefore probably in the future consume less on this planet because they ate that particular dead organism that suffered. I see this as a at least understandable statement until I am confronted with some counter-argument where it is explained how that is not more excessively just squandering unnecessarily this suffering that has at that point in time already been imposed on a formerly consciously existing sentient organism.
But it accounts for 0.0001% of my diet or less. Maybe 3 cans last year, maybe. So this is just such bullshit. So I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan because 0.0001% of my behavior doesn't fit in the category. I guess that's his argument, because I'm just being fair and open, saying, yes, if that's what your veganism is, some sort of technicality, well then, yes, maybe I broke the technicality. But again, it's complicated, because I'm also, what he can't say is, Inmendum's not a defender of animal rights. Say, I don't want to be known as being a vegetarian or a vegan. I want to be known as a defender of animal rights, and the rights of the welfare of animals. And those mean the ones in nature. It's not just about food, it's about laboratory animals, and it's about the biosystem that we are feeding off of indirectly every day. The oxygen you breathe and all the rest of it is all created by this biosphere that suffers every day. And so yeah, I'd rather be, if I'm going to be labeled, I'd like to be appropriately labeled. gets into that whole Joe Rogan thing.
This is not something that he proactively sought, this label of being a vegan. It's something that he does not seem to have too much qualms about because it aligns with the truth of the matter as far as what a better human being is going to resemble in terms of their behavior. Consuming less animal products, using less animal products and purchasing them, contributing to the torture of animals for the production of quote-unquote goods for human parasitic consumption. That is a rational aspiration. But the more fundamental underlying point is the defense of animal rights, in terms of at least how Inmendham here is expressing what he sees as the more specific ethic, so to speak.
Obsessions with labels. So yes, it really doesn't, I mean, he's only hurting his own credibility by titling videos that way, in my opinion, so go ahead, hurt your own credibility, make yourself look like an ass. And when you mock and these talks like vegans were born that way, or they learned how to be vegan when they were 6 years old because they had an emotional attachment to, Bambi or something. And clearly most vegans aren't created that way.
In many circumstances, that is something that they came to gradually, sometimes painstakingly in terms of the cognitive dissonance. And because of that, it's something that by the time they fully adopt the position, definitively, decidedly, they are already conditioned, acclimated, very accustomed to a lifestyle that includes eating animal products, consuming animal products.
They come to the conclusion through years of perhaps some sense of dissidence and reason that, yes, they can do better than that. And so he concedes, he argues that, he contends that there's nothing reason-based in the philosophy of first do no harm or don't cause suffering to animals unnecessarily. So unnecessary harm to him is not a viable, rational concept that you need to pay any attention to. There's no such thing. And the welfare of feeling things is not meaningful to anything that matters.
When we are discussing ideas that relate to ethics, being overly focused on particular aspects perceived about a certain person's character or labels ascribed to them or even by them to describe themselves, sometimes can detract from what their substance or content or communication is directed about and the overarching context in which it is being expressed. For example, in this instance, we have Hypocrisy titling a video to the effect that Inmendham is not a vegetarian. And part of the context here is that this user, Hypocrisy, fundamentally rejects the premise that suffering is negative, that it matters intrinsically, that there is such a thing as intrinsic value to suffering. At least on a consistent basis, he fails to concede to this truth. So focusing on what this thread is focusing on detracts from the more meaningful underlying premises that we, in my opinion, should be concentrating on when discussing vital propositions of what is true in regards to ethics, so that we can actually increase our collective understanding and consensus to accurate descriptions in order to increase the likelihood that we will actually become better and improve the world. If we become, on the other hand, too focused on things that are less directly and or critically relevant to the underlying ideas related to the subject, and that is not only not productive, it is potentially destructive to the utility of these conversations, of what they are supposed to be directed towards.
It's not in the matter category. Suffering is not in the it matters category. Compromise and cooperation, that's matters. But suffering doesn't matter. And, it's on its face idiotic to call himself somebody who's doing reasoning or logic, which is just basically mixing facts and saying that somehow he has a fact that says suffering is irrelevant. It's not something that's going to be part of your reasoning or your logic. You can cause as much as you want, and as long as you did it in your cooperative way, it's okay. Imbecile. So anyway, that gets back to Kant and this whole subject of the, advocating for animals, and there's people who think there's some cat interest.
Now I'm going to begin the actual thread and re-explain as I go through it. The original post by Dragon God Thunder. Quote, I don't fully understand your logic. If you eat 2 cans of tuna per year, does that make you 99% vegetarian? When I apply that logic in anything else, it breaks down quite easily. Like, if I only kill 1 person during my 80 years of lifespan, does that make me 1% murderer? If I only smoke 1 pack per month, have I quit smoking? And can I call myself a non-smoker and insert Gary's logic? So what I would say with the first question, if you eat 2 cans of tuna per year, does that make you 9% vegetarian? Given the definition, one who does not eat non-dairy animal products, they are not a vegetarian or a vegan, according to that definition. But as we all know, the point of language and communication is to convey understanding, to transmit an idea. And within the context of ethics, when it comes to veganism, it is more to the point of, for example, with negative utilitarianism, it is basically a consequentialist framework where it is essentially contingent upon the fact that, as reality is, the reason why being a vegan is generally going to be better is because that is going to be connected to less suffering in the world. When you have a circumstance where someone, for example, has already purchased an animal product, if you have not purchased that product, they're about to throw it away, they offer it to you, and in that moment you take it, there's no clear, direct, necessary implication that you are causing there to be a consequence of more negative value in the world. Defining terms is obviously critical here, but let's just continue with your comment. So when I apply that logic and anything else, it breaks down quite easily. Like, if I only kill 1 person during my 80 years of lifespan, does that make me 1% murderer? I'm not going to use the same analogy or what have you with a murderer, because in most modern civilizations, with murdering, that's not something that is already common practice. It is already the normal conditioning of a human being. That's not something that we are acclimated to or what have you, directly murdering other people or other sentient organisms. And with hunting, yes, you have that, but that's not something that the average person does. The average person indirectly tortures an insane quantity or amount of feeling organisms within their lifetime. Not the case for directly murdering things. That's largely why I would use these different subtleties discussing these ideas within the context of ethics. Continuing on with the comment. If I only smoke 1 pack per month, have I quit smoking? No, you have not. You might be doing better if you before that had smoked 5 packs a month. The point of much of this, in my view, is improving ourselves, improving our function. And an obsession with labels is not the best tool to do that. Be open about the ways we're describing things. Be honest, but have the goal defined as progressing, improving our function. The emphasis should be on becoming better. What we have to work with is what we are, on average. This community of thinkers and antinatalists and ethicists and those of us who have found this niche of interaction where we have pinpointed these particular truths, or at least we are engaged with these ideas, we do not constitute the generality, at least in our thinking, and some of us behaviorally are less destructive in terms of our value impact in the world. But the rational goal here, the ethics here, is focused on impacting many people, which usefully we're going to draw from the average person, because the average person, statistically speaking, makes up the bulk that we can interact with. Why human beings? Why the average human being? Because again, it's the bulk of things, organisms that we can interact with, that we know have this complex enough neurology, complex enough brain system that we can actually impact their thinking and their behavior to a point where we can potentially significantly change for the better the nature of reality in the future. So an obsession with labels is not something that is always going to be constructive to exercise. Sometimes we need to be more prudent with how we are communicating. So basically we need to have the ultimate goal here of ethics in mind when we are explaining things, without compromising meaning, without destroying language. I might be missing something, but it seems clear to me. The point is simply not to eat meat/fish and you ate it. Thus you're no longer by definition a vegetarian, since a vegetarian would never eat meat or fish unless extreme circumstances like they're starving. In the real world we call it hypocrisy. Let's pull up the definition of hypocrisy. What is hypocrisy? The practice of claiming to have higher standards or more noble beliefs than is the case. If a given vegetarian or vegan, in like say 1% of circumstances, when someone gives them something that they're going to throw away, like a can of tuna, if they take that and eat it, are they acting out then the practice of claiming to have higher standards or more noble beliefs than is the case? So higher standards. Standards. For example, in Mendham is he not exercising higher standards? The standards being based on, does this have a consequence of more suffering than the alternative? That standard is still being applied. The suffering has already occurred. It's not that he purchased the tuna or more noble beliefs. Now his beliefs, they are authentic. So that's not the case either. I would say it's not being hypocritical. In the real world, we call it hypocrisy. Not that I myself am a vegetarian. I love meat. So I don't really have a dog in this fight. But I do not agree with the adaptive logic he inserts simply because he's the one that ate the tuna. Can I claim to be a pacifist while only kicking the ass out of one person each year? Does that make me 99% a pacifist? Some of these definitions, and this again goes with the point of the obsession with labels, sometimes it is more sensible, in my view, to, within the definition, have it be describing a spectrum. With certain terms here, no one fits the definition. Does anyone fit the definition of, let's see, what is a pacifist? A person who believes that war and violence are unjustifiable. Holding the belief that war and violence are unjustifiable. So you ask, can I claim to be a pacifist while only kicking the ass out of one person each year? Does that make me 99% a pacifist? Obviously, your tone implies it's a rhetorical question. But actually, according to the definition I just pulled up from Google, which I believe is based on the Oxford Dictionary of Standard English, something like that. It's a common, obviously, meaning to the term. The definition is a person who believes that war and violence are unjustifiable. If you believe that war and violence are unjustifiable, and you find yourself in a circumstance where you are on an island with some person that you have absolute certain knowledge are going to carry out widespread, horrific war and violence themselves, and that for whatever reason, no one else is going to stop them. No one else is going to do anything until it's too late. And for whatever reason, for example, you're not able to convince anyone else that they're going to do it. You're not able to simply detain them or hold them or delay them or inhibit or prevent them without using some degree of violence. And you know that it's going to prevent massively more violence if you do not do it. Would it be the most logical thing to not do anything? Or would it in that circumstance actually be more reasonable to do the lesser of two evils if that is literally your only option? There is a circumstance where, for example, kicking the ass out of that one person would be more sensible. And the reason that you would do that would be that you believe that war and violence are unjustifiable, and you know for certain in this thought experiment that they're going to do violence and war to, let's say, the entire planet, all of the different species of animals. So you actually carry out some act of violence against them because of that belief. We should not have vague definitions that are meaningless or arbitrary. All I'm saying is that depending on the context and depending on what is being discussed and depending on the relevance, etc., depending on these sorts of things, we do not always have the best definitions to work with or the most reasonable, and an obsession with these particular inflexible definitions are not always applicable to all general circumstances. Continuing with your original post here. And why is the title of vegetarian so important? Why can't you just be a guy that eats fish every now and then? Who gives a shit? Well, again, he actually did say if he's going to be labeled, then he would like to be properly labeled, and that would be a defender of animal rights. So my first response to you in response to that comment is, probably there are hardly any human beings in modern times who are technically speaking anything more than incomplete vegans or even vegetarians, i.e. even after becoming such, it's often the case that such individuals still committed such ethical crimes at some points in their historical life experience. The point of emphasis should be on striving to progress to becoming better human beings, not on the fact that we fail to be 100% consistent and perfect at that endeavor at all times before our deaths. An impractically inflexible, all-or-nothing mindset will tend to rationalize defeatist discounting of any effort towards the fight or advocacy. All I mean there is, it's just proportional concentration, proportional acknowledgement, and addressing the more relevant ideas. What is the most rational or reasonable way to proportion your concentration on particular ideas? Is it on, for example, something like what this post is centered around? Within the full context of what ethics is supposed to be about, if we actually understand the purpose of ethics and that there is value and that we are actively already at this very moment engaged in the value equation. If we understand that, then when we're communicating, secondarily, but at least on a certain level, we should be aware of how we're communicating, what we're focusing on in our communication, and how the way we're communicating, or the way that we're focusing what we're communicating about in a particular context, the way that that affects our impact, what that will encourage, what that will discourage. Comments like these probably encourage the average person to what is already easier for them, focusing on anything but the vital point that we can do better in regards to preventing suffering. Next comment in the thread is by Dragon God Thunder. Quote, "There are hardly any," end quote. Where do you get this data from? So when I say there are hardly any human beings in modern times who are technically speaking anything more than incomplete vegans or even vegetarians, I wrote, in essence, usually it's the case that they still were not vegetarians or vegans before they understood the position. So when they die, their life still does not fit the category of vegetarian or vegan in the technical way that you are using the definition there. Dragon God, your comment here, there are hardly any. Where do you get this data from? I do not like using this phrase, common sense, but seriously, this reasonably should be understood as common sense, that people brought up to change into a certain ethical position, because this is, again, the overarching context here is ethics. People contradict their value systems. People contradict, they compromise their integrity in regards to their value systems, or in terms of their principles, in terms of their ethics, at least in some point or another in their lives. We are flawed. We have crude psychologies which corrupt our reasoning and our ability to rationally behave. We are not Spock. We're not Vulcans. Where do you get this data from? It's a philosophy, a lifestyle you adapt. And if you fail at whatever the requirements are, you've simply failed. You can go ahead and start all over again, but then that's what you do. Playing semantics is a waste of time. Vegetarians that eat meat are not vegetarians because you add a few variables, unless it's an extreme one like starvation. So that's the exception that you say is still applicable to the definition. So I'm going to read the definition, but I want to know the definition that you understand. When I Google what is a vegetarian, it pulls up a person who does not eat meat or fish, and sometimes other animal products, especially for moral, and I would say ethical, moral, religious, or health reasons. So let's take part of this definition, what actually it applies to in this context. It is a person who does not eat meat or fish, and sometimes other animal products, especially for, so in this context it is, for moral, but more aptly here, ethical reasons. When those reasons, which are, to sort of oversimplify it, consequentialist in nature, when those reasons do not apply, then that definition is not being contradicted. At least if it is, then that definition is not the optimal definition for this context. There are variables that are different than just this exception where you say, unless it's an extreme one like starvation. I would say that that's weaker than what I'm proposing. I argue, unless you're not actually contributing to suffering. Why is that not an exception? Based on the reasoning that an animal rights defender, for instance, has agreed with the position in general, it's simple hypocrisy. No, I disagree. It's not simple hypocrisy. Simple hypocrisy would be something like uploading these videos that Admendum uploads, or whoever uploads videos similar to this. Then they go out and go to McDonald's because they're craving a Big Mac, and they buy a Big Mac. Something like that. That would be more along the lines of real, accurately described hypocrisy. Not someone's going to throw away a can of tuna fish anyways, the suffering has already occurred, and then you are going to consume that, and this is something that happens very rarely. Those are definitely different things, and I think you can certainly understand that. My next comment. You used an analogy of killing one person in an 80-year lifespan. I was basically integrating it into that metaphorical context. So again, in the sense that hardly anyone, even after adopting a given ethic, will not nonetheless still die having incompletely fulfilled the obligations of it at various points in their lifespan, regardless of it being before or after their philosophical reformation. Now, if viewing it from the perspective of the starting point being given as the point of philosophical reformation, I would argue the same. Most, for example, Judeo-Christians commit crimes of non-compliance with regards to the Ten Commandments. Most vegans consume in one way or another animal products, not necessarily dietarily, so for example clothing, even after adopting their stance as such, etc. Our limits and discipline and so on are a reflection of the power that our psychologies have over our behaviors. The point though, again, is that striving to do better is without any doubt a rational endeavor to pursue and commit to as best as possible. That is my emphasis. So, if you still have something which you think would somehow render that incorrect, then I'm eager to know what it is. Otherwise, we should probably digress here. Another comment from just another YouTuber. False analogy. He caused no harm with that tuna. I would agree. As he described it, there was no harm that he was the cause of in regards to the fish, the tuna fish. Comment by a Ben Dover. Gary's point that he may eat some really old can of tuna once upon a blue moon and still have a clear conscience. Just like I am a vegan, but I wear my leather shoes that I bought a long time before I went vegan. Because it makes no sense to waste the animal's sacrifice and not use the shoes. Same here. The fish has already been killed a long time ago, and he creates no new harm by consuming it. I really do not see an issue here. Just wasteful nitpicking. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and say that you're not necessarily wastefully nitpicking Dragon God Thunder, but again, I will still argue that your comment is representative of a certain pattern of comments that seem like they tend to encourage or reinforce the average viewer that might come across this content as they look through the comment sections. Do not have to actually see the fundamental points of the video, something that they are able to latch onto that will allow them to divert their attention away from the fundamental parts of the video, concentrate on something other than the crucial, most relevant, meaningful subject matter that is being discussed. Because it is easier to do that for the average viewer that might come across this with a very different position than the positions that, for example, in Mendham defends. Alan, I used more than one, and I refuse to read gibberish. You can start by writing like a person from the 20th century. I'm not English nor American, and I cannot stand people that talk or write in this case like Sherlock Holmes. Reeks of desperation. Why would someone go out of their way to sound like a complete ass? Thinking that's how smart people talk. Bend over. No, that's not his point. His point is that he is 99% vegetarian. If I recall correctly, and it's in this video, I played a very clip, it was something along the lines of, oh, am I not if 0.001% of the time I ate this tuna that someone was going to throw away? No, that's not his point. His point is that he is 99% vegetarian because he only eats 2 cans of tuna each year. So, let's include a Big Mac on that list per year. Now he's 90% vegetarian. But the point is, that's not included. That's something that you're adding in, and it's something that would fundamentally change the equation that this is describing. If it was a Big Mac, and presumably a Big Mac that he purchased, that would mean that he was causing that harm. If he purchased it, that would be fundamentally different. You know that. So let's include a Big Mac on that list per year. Now he's 90% vegetarian. How can you, Stans, not see the obvious fault in logic? Just another YouTuber. False analogy? Again, I used more than one. You just responded to. Simpleton. Why do you guys respond when it's clear that I want Gary's response, not his dick-riding fans that lacks the intelligence to question anything or see fault in logic? Question you have to ask yourself is, if a person eats meat, even if it's a little, is that person a vegetarian? The answer is no. Let me see you guys do some more mental gymnastic on how a person that doesn't smoke cigarettes can still be a smoker. Like your president would say, sad. And then I responded to Dragon God Thunder. What was so complex that you took it as unintelligible gibberish? A good deal of my underlying points here, more simply put, since you mentioned a language barrier, is that addicted humans, the vast majority of us, are brought up conditioned into meat consumption. After intellectually adopting a vegetarian or vegan position, mentally are not necessarily the absolute walking example of hypocrisy, just when we might fail to behave according to that technical definition 100% of the time, at least if you take it to the real absolute in terms of their full lifespan. I would still like for you to address how your 80-year lifespan analogy is demonstrated above to further support my point. Depending on the context, for example, face-to-face murder is not something we're socio-culturally conditioned into, nor, obviously, as depersonalized from if we were to do it versus, say, meat eating. So I was saying how, again, we're not brought up and conditioned into murdering others. And when you're eating a cheeseburger, for example, you're more depersonalized to the negative consequences of what you are doing versus when you are directly murdering someone. Part of the reason to why I brought that up, because it is not completely analogous. It is at least partly a false equivalence. It's part of the reason why so many of us are able to be meat eaters, but not able to be a direct murderer or serial killer or something like that. And one of my statements in my comment here is we are simply incapable of existing in a way that will not turn out to define us as being flawed creatures. It is impossible that you will not have some blood on your hands, not be covered in some kind of blood, that you will not have some kind of destructive consequence in the world. Theoretically, you could outdo that by positive effect. On the net level, you could overcome that, but directly speaking, it is impossible to not cause harm. That's just how it is for us. This is why I argue that an excess of preoccupation or concentration with such human limitations is less than rational. Based on historically observed patterns, and as far as I can tell, it sometimes seems to be highlighted aimlessly or perhaps just needlessly for no apparent logical reason. Anyhow, so then you again comment, oh, you are playing semantics, I never cared for it. And it's not that I don't understand you, it's that it's frustrating reading it. It's like you got out of your way to find words to express something that could be easily shortened and explained in words that are actually used in real life. I never claimed he's the walking incarnation of hypocrisy. I'm saying it simply is hypocrisy. It's the definition for it, claiming something and doing the complete opposite. I don't know why you think it's okay to fail a philosophy or an idea and still claim it's your philosophy when it's clearly not. I don't know how to address it. Now I seriously do not understand you. I guess you were trying to simply say it's false analogy, right? You need it to fit exactly, and if it differs in the slightest, you're going to try to poke some holes. Am I understanding you correctly? Since I do not understand your question at all, I'm going to simply tell you why that was one of the analogy I used, and the only one people seem to have a problem with. I just took Gary's logic and inserted it to anything, like the pacifist analogy I made, which you clearly avoid. I've addressed it, and actually I point out how I did not avoid it. That guy claimed my post was a false analogy when there were more analogies than simply the murder one, so yes. He's obviously a simpleton, which he simply avoided responding to. Pick and choose, right? How about if I claim that I'm a heterosexual and I have sex with a guy once a year? Does that make me 99% hetero? Language usage is not going to be uniform. It is not going to be the same in the way that you use it in every single context of every single idea and every single subject ever. That is part of my point here. Continuing on in the thread, this is a point in which I become noticeably frustrated. My comment here, quote, "Screw it. I consciously changed my mind on numerous words in my previous comment to simplify it. And at this point in the comment, I'm basically explaining my frustration, saying I made a conscious effort to simplify my language, and you still misunderstood, and that was frustrating. I ask for you to reread part of one of my comments and how we are not conditioned to face-to-face slaughter others, directly murdering others, like the average person is conditioned into eating meat. That is not something that I think can be rationally ignored in terms of analogizing or comparing, because again, as I state here, it would be much less depersonalized than the harm that we do through the process of eating meat. That was largely in response exactly to your pacifist analogy. So I was not avoiding that pacifist analogy. And as I stated here, my intention with my comments here are not to focus on Gary. If you reread the wording of my comments followed by yours, you'll see how you keep pivoting to amend them and how your point is about a personal facet and so on and so forth. So a personal facet, all I mean is something that has to do with Gary personally, with a label. That's something that has to personally do with Gary. A large part of my basic point, it's not about Gary. I'm pointing out an idea about, for example, the effect that comments like this one that you've posted can have on the functionality of this YouTube platform, about its utility, about its usefulness. Just imagine if you were trying to train someone so that they can compete in a math competition and the stakes were high. If they lose the competition, their family is going to be killed in front of them or something. If they win the competition, then $500,000 goes to some kind of actually useful charities, and $500,000 they receive. And they can only use it for things like education, purchasing a home, something like this, useful things, so that they're going to probably use it more responsibly. So good if they win the math competition. Very bad if they lose. It's a very simple math competition. It's against other like 4-year-olds or something. And you're teaching them about simple addition or something like that. The addition includes decimals. So you have written on the paper 2.0 plus 2.0 equals 4.0. So it's 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? But for whatever reason, you're including a decimal place to the 10th. And instead of focusing on seemingly what's more meaningful, which is the sum of the quantity of 2 and the quantity of another 2, that those two quantities combined together, the output of that, the sum of that is 4. They just are so concentrated on the way that you write your zeros. Like, it's not a perfect oval shape. And they just keep asking, if you're not even able to write this oval the right way, why should I, like, your zeros look so sloppy or something. Almost with this attitude of, why is this even worth listening to when your zeros look like this? Admittedly, this is not a good example, okay? It's something I just thought of at the moment. But the point that I'm trying to explain is that there are cases where you can become bogged down into details of something that are not quite relevant, potentially almost not at all relevant to the real point of a conversation or an idea or a discussion on an idea. And potentially you can contribute to the weakness of the influence potential of the conversation, of the educational exchange. Hopefully that helps. Anyhow, I'll continue with my comment here. I'm not focusing on Gary. If you reread my comments followed by yours, you'll see yours is more to do with him personally regarding his claims and his relation to, for example, his character and his hypocrisy, and just in terms of the definition, as you were stating, and as I understand what you're saying, whereas I continually try to emphasize a general point about matters of greater relevance to focus on. Much of the reason is because I sense a pattern in people paying attention to things that are just superficial. They're not as relevant. That, again, they detract. They take their attention away from strengthening the goal of ethics, from contributing to solutions, to contributing to what needs to happen before the solution happens, which is just focusing on the actual problems, the real problems. Not the problems of how you write your zeros, but the problems of actually solving 2.0 plus 2.0. The actual problem is, what is the sum of that? The problem is not, oh, the zeros are not perfectly drawn. That's not the problem. The problem is finding the sum of 2 plus 2. Not how someone is imperfectly doing that at a given moment. The problem is just identifying what you're trying to do and then working on solving that as best as we can. I know that your original post was more regarding amendum. I was trying to demonstrate a view that these sorts of comments, they're not very constructive. Not only that, but over time, and just by the amount of comments that are somewhat like this, I mean, yours is not as superficial as a lot of comments are, certainly, but just over time and by how many of some of these kinds of comments and certain comments which are just more obviously and possibly just purposefully not on the fundamental subject, just by the fact of that, they appear to just severely bottleneck, and they block. They're an obstacle to the potential, the utility, the usefulness, the possible power that this video platform might be able to have sometimes. So I can understand your point about technical inaccuracy of self-identifying label when it is broken at some point or another or multiple points in time. If the definition is technically, if we take it specifically as a person who does not eat meat or fish and or sometimes other animal products, if we end it there and we do not qualify that with especially for moral, religious, or health reasons, then yes, someone who eats, even if it's 1 or 2 cans of tuna fish, they're not technically a vegetarian. Again, I understand, and it does make sense in the frame of reference that you're speaking about it from, and I would agree within that technical definition, but overall I do disagree that that is the most sensible way to comment on the subject. I just think as a practical matter, it encourages all of this excessive, too much attention on comparatively irrelevant details. So it sort of almost represents one of these apparent patterns of people's inability to altogether, collectively, work together on solutions or a solution to a fundamental problem like suffering without or instead of just going off of the real core of the subject, just going off of that, just derailing the discussions because of basically comparatively insignificant personal trivialities, superficial details and things. That's all. So then you respond, I'm sorry, but I cannot understand you. Sure, maybe you're not playing semantics. I cannot honestly tell. You probably communicate this way on a daily basis. I really am struggling trying to understand. I'll try it this way. Okay, and then you copy and paste and then respond. So reread the bit of my comment where I mentioned we're not conditioned to face-to-face slaughter, blah, 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 and then you respond, that I think I understand. You are trying to say in 1,000,000 words or more that my murder analogy is faulty, right? I'm saying that it is at least partly not analogous. And I explained that already. Because we are not pre-programmed to kill each other like we are at eating meat. That, and, for example, it's something that when you murder someone, unless you're like a psychopath, it's something that you're not going to be able to just be completely depersonalized from that. Whereas when you're eating a Big Mac or something, it's just a burger, right? It's not a mammalian cow that is just as sensitive and emotionally rich of a consciousness as you are. Sure, I do not understand what this changes. That was never my point. Right, your point was just that it fails to fit the technical definition, as far as I understand. Sure, I do not understand what this changes. That was never my point, nor Gary's. He never argued that his programming made him eat the tuna. He says it would have gone to waste, therefore he is justified to still eat it and call himself a vegetarian, because it still is consistent with the reasoning, which is basically consequentialist in nature. In other words, if a cooked chicken just magically popped up in front of his house, he would eat it, since it's a waste throwing it. That was his line of reasoning. If a cooked chicken magically appeared in front of his house and he ate it, did he cause any suffering? Behaviors which cause, indirectly or directly, bring about more suffering, that is the enemy. The enemy is not that eating meat is bad. It's bad because the process that allows for you to do that, it requires suffering usually, unnecessary suffering. This is again quoting my comment and then you're going to respond. I'm not focusing on Gary. If you reread my comments wording followed by yours, you'll see how blah blah blah, taking it back to him. So my comment is that I'm focused on a general point. It seems like your comment is more focused on him personally, and I'm saying how that basically obstructs conversation. It basically limits the potential and the power of our discussions here because it focuses on comparatively kind of irrelevant personal characteristics of particular people within a certain movement or a certain position, instead of arguing about the merits of a particular position itself. Arguments fall or stand upon their own merits, not upon particular advocates or defenders of it potentially inconsistently applying it. So then you respond to that bit of my comment. Yes, I am not sure why we are taking this away from Gary, or if his line of reasoning is right or wrong. This confuses me even further to what it is you want to talk about or where we even disagree or agree. I do not know what a personal facet is, personal feature. I did not see a translation for it on Google either. I'm not sure if I'm reading it correctly, but you're trying to make the point that almost nobody can be a successful vegetarian. No, I'm making the point that generally speaking, almost no one is perfect in applying their ethics, including vegans, at least within the full span of their lifetime, including before the point at which they understood and accepted their position. You seem to be saying something like, oh, nobody can be a successful vegetarian because we are programmed to eat meat. I do not agree with that. I do not agree with that either. That's not what I was saying. I know plenty of people that's proven that they can manage their lifestyle for most of their life. I know people with even more extreme ideologies that stays strictly on that path. But do you know personally that they always stay on that path even when no one is watching for their entire lifespan? It's all about willpower. It's partly about willpower, so to speak, but I would disagree that it's all about willpower, and I mean, of course, that would depend upon as well how you define willpower. It's all about willpower and how much you actually believe that shit. It's not all about how you believe, in my opinion, no. The power that addictions can have, it sucks how much power they can have, because you can understand how something is very harmful or very irrational, of very poor judgment. Yet on a crude psychological level, just so addicted and dependent upon it that you can believe it completely, mentally speaking, but it can still have power over you. Continuing here with your comment, to me it's like an excuse, quote, humans are not perfect, therefore nobody can be 100% anything, end quote, is the excuse I hear. Again, this is largely something that I'm arguing against. If you go back here in the thread, let's see where I write, an impractically inflexible all or nothing mindset will a lot of times rationalize a defeatist discounting of any effort towards the fight or advocacy or defending for better animal rights in general. The technical definition that it seems like you are latching onto, again, is not the most sensible way of communicating within the context of ethics, when most people are not probably in practical reality going to be 100% within the entirety of their lives. They're going to have, if not only before adopting the position, have eaten animal products, but after the fact, there's some kind of extenuating circumstance or circumstance where, for example, like in this case, someone is about to throw something out and they eat it. But when I use the word defeatist, for example, I am referencing people that do use the fact that human beings oftentimes demonstrate that we're not able to be perfect in applying many given positions or philosophies and ideas and so on because of our own flaws and limitations and imperfections as people, as human animals that are nonetheless still significantly controlled by very crude mechanisms and forces within our own psychologies and so on, evolutionarily And that is not a grounds upon which we should then discount the effort completely and not even strive to be better. So that's actually the opposite of what I am arguing. Again, I'm not hating on Gary for not being a successful vegetarian. I could not care less. I'm simply questioning his logic, how he so arrogantly justifies it. And I am wondering if that logic can be applied to anything, because from where I stand, that logic fails in every situation or scenario I can think of. Do you agree or disagree? A point of more emphasis, the truth that unnecessary impositions of suffering on feeling things without any justifiable reason is wrong to do that. And at least admitting that and advocating against that, even if you're not able to completely be consistent with that yourself and your behaviors, at least you should vote against that, so to speak. And that's a different sense of defending animal rights, of being of the position or of the mentality of vegan. And that's not what the definition is, the more meaningful sense of it. But at least within the context of animal rights, advocating for it is sort of generally going to be a prerequisite that is going to need to be in place before someone is going to actually reflect that in their behavior. And it is the least being more adamantly requested of people is to just, at least in our thinking, to be disciplined, at least be disciplined when we are gaining an understanding of the world, to at least be disciplined there. And then after that, hopefully, our behaviors will begin to reflect that. It's not going to be an immediate consequence. As soon as you understand something, you're not going to then behave consistently with that 100% of the time. That's an unreasonable expectation, especially if you're already a couple of decades into your lifetime and you're into your conditioning and programming. But in some cases, we are able to overcome it for the vast majority of the time and for the most part. And there are circumstances where it's not due to a lack of discipline, it's just due to scenarios where the reasoning behind accepting the position are not being compromised. So for example, we are not causing the harm, and so it is sometimes justified to commit the act that is generally associated with being bad. That's something that is not reflected in this very technical definition that it seems like you are attached to in your commentary. So then you quote part of my comment where I state that I can understand your point about technical inaccuracy of self-identifying label when it is broken at some point or another. Again, I understand it makes sense in the frame of reference you were speaking about it from. I just think that as a practical matter, it encourages all of this excessive attention on relatively irrelevant details. So it's representative of one of the patterns of people's inability to work together collectively on a solution to a fundamental problem, instead of sort of derailing the discussion over more or less petty personal trivialities, superficial things. That's all. Your response to that is, understanding is not agreeing nor disagreeing. Why have this conversation if you're not going to pick a side when it comes to the question I asked? I feel like you have a dog in this fight when it comes to how humanity should perceive vegetarianism in general. Broad terms, I think we should simply follow the definition of the wording. Now, that statement, I'm going to interject here into your comment. So, what I will argue is that language should not be molested, so to speak. We should not conveniently use language to satisfy our own scheming and things like that, in terms of it being an arbitrary sort of nonchalant changing of meanings and things. At the same time, though, we are the things that have developed this system of language. For example, right now, the particular language we're using is American English. It's not something that was written on a stone and that we discovered and that we have to use the same exact definitions that were written into the stone. Language is something that is ever evolving, it is ever changing. It's a representative symbolic system that we have developed over time gradually and that we continue to adapt, that is used to identify and describe things in the world, circumstances in the world, and phenomenon in the world, and overall certain contexts. So no, we should not necessarily simply follow the definition of the wording specifically here, being of the very technical definition of a particular meaning of the word. We should use the most sensible meaning that is the most applicable to the context we're talking about. And in this context of ethics, it is something along the lines of that you just do not eat animal products based upon ethical reason that results in more suffering that is unnecessary. And within that definition, there are circumstances which are exceptions where you commit the act, you eat the fish or whatever, but it is not actually causing more unnecessary suffering in itself. And so it is still consistent in the practical sense of the word. I think we should simply follow the definition of the wording. If you want to define yourself as something, you should live up to it. I will state not everything about this subject is simple. I mean, there's certain complexities and nuances to it. There's room here for argument where, depending on the exact wording we want to have of the definition, there could be different positions on how exactly we should define, for example. Obviously, we do want to preserve words and meanings and ways of sort of conveniently identifying ourselves and other people in a way where we are able to be described in terms of our value impact. So, for example, we should not only have words that describe whether or not we advocate against torture. We do need to have words that describe how well someone is actually behaving in terms of how much torture they generally probably commit. We should have words for that. Anything else and you're something else, like a hybrid vegetarian or an occasional meat eater. Find the right fit to describe yourself accurately. Well, for myself, I would argue that I am a struggling or an aspiring vegan, something like this, but I could do much better than I am doing. I will state that for myself. But again, a large part of my fundamental point here is that the greater proportion of the exchanges here should be on the ideas themselves and the fact that they are true, and that as a description and as logically obligating prescriptive ethical obligations, and to work towards the collective understanding and acceptance of that so that we can then move forward. Like how a person that has homosexual sex once a year is not a homosexual nor a heterosexual. He's a bisexual. You can add variables, talk about pre-programming all you want, society, culture, etc. I will never accept something like, this guy is 99% straight because he only sucks a couple of dicks per year. Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with that. Edit. Isn't Gary just a vegan by default? They are allowed to eat fish, right? Why wouldn't he just call himself that instead? No, you have it backwards. Vegetarian, many times it's defined as allowed to eat dairy products. Fish, vegan, is more of a all excluding no animal products. And my comment after that is, alright, very good, I've sensed you're not being dishonest or knowingly misunderstanding, etc. I should apologize for implying that you were before. I now realize I should probably completely reword some basics about my actual points. I know it's frustrating to constantly have to search for words to try to understand where someone is coming from or to understand what someone is saying, but I'm doing the best I can here in this video within reason. You probably have had to look up some words that I've used, but I'm doing what I can. I do not intend to be esoteric. On the contrary, I do want to communicate clearly and effectively. And again, I'm going to reiterate some of this last bit of one of my comments. I am not claiming that it is not possible to be a successful vegetarian. Secondly, language must be used responsibly and with clear meaning. So the proper use of the term vegetarian to describe oneself or another person, I would say something like someone who successfully abstains, their discipline succeeds in holding themselves back from eating fish, animal products. And a vegan is more rigorous. Lastly, I'm not here to not take a side. I will explain my position as I have. And okay, your last comment is, yes, I felt the same from you, that you wanted an honest discussion. That's why I changed my attitude. It's hard sometimes in text, especially with a language barrier. There's much less of a way to perceive what certain undertones might be in someone's statements and what they're saying. And you state how, with for example, how Sam Harris talks is not confusing to you one bit, but if you read it, it becomes much harder to grasp. I do like the video format of communication. You do appreciate discussing, debating thoughts and ideas, but it's just that you do not actually have any deep thoughts on vegetarianism. Your thoughts are mostly CO2 is bad, carbon dioxide is bad, there are better alternatives than cattle, and you fucking love meat. But see, I fucking love meat is not a thought, that is a feeling. I'm sure that you understand love is a feeling phenomenon, and an irrational one, I would add. I'm from Sweden. I'm looking forward to what you're going to say. Yes, and I did not attack you for typos, because I'm not trying to be petty or nitpicky. I am sincere here in my concerns about what certain types of comments can encourage and the impacts that they can have. My concern is not just about communication for the sake of communication. There's a point to communication, and there's sometimes multiple points different points, priorities, or reasons, or things that we should respect when it comes to communication, or things that we should have in mind. So some of those things were the reasons for why I responded to you. Here I'm just going to supplement my reflexive sort of reactions and responses, doing it in the heat of the moment to this camera. I'm going to show from certain other perspectives from other people to illustrate some of these points of view. One of these, the URL here is www.animal-rights-library.com. The case for vegetarianism is at its strongest when we see it as a moral protest against our use of animals as mere things, to be exploited for our convenience in whatever way makes them most cheaply available to us. Only the tiniest fractions of the tens of billions of farm animals slaughtered for food each year, the figure for the United States alone is 9 billion, were treated during their lives in ways that respected their interests. Questions about the wrongness of killing in itself are not relevant to the moral issue of eating meat or eggs from factory-farmed animals, as most people in developed countries do. Even when animals are roaming freely over large areas, as sheep and cattle do in Australia, operations like hot iron branding, castration, and dehorning are carried out without any regard for the animal's capacity to suffer. The same is true of handling and transporting prior to slaughter. In the light of these facts, the issue to focus on is not whether there are some circumstances in which it could be right to eat meat, but on what we can do to avoid contributing to this immense amount of animal suffering. And then this is from Wikipedia. The article here is Ethics of Eating Meat. This is in the section entitled Overview of the Argument Against Eating Meat. Ethicists like Tom Regan and Peter Singer define ethical in terms of suffering rather than ecology. Mark Rowlands argues that the real determinant of whether it is ethical to cause suffering is whether there is any vital need to cause it. If not, then causing it is unethical. This is from a Reddit Ask Philosophy thread. The original post was titled, "Should a vegetarian eat meat that would otherwise go to waste?" I would be interested in hearing what Redditors in this sub think about this, and also whether any philosophers have addressed this issue. My thoughts thus far are that by eating meat that would definitely otherwise be thrown away, I'm not supporting the meat industry, damaging the environment, or causing any animals to be killed for my sake. And I'm at least allowing for the animals already killed to have had some purpose. I would not use the word purpose there, but anyhow. At the same time, if I have access to a lot of meat that will otherwise be thrown away, I could find myself in a situation where I'm eating just as much meat as if I were not a vegetarian, which I do not want. On a related note, if it can be accepted that it is morally acceptable to eat meat that would be wasted, could an argument be made that it is immoral not to eat meat that would otherwise be wasted? And then a highlighted reply here is I know both types. My good friend seems to be more of a utilitarian about it. He is okay with eating leftover food occasionally. Bear in mind that even here, utilitarians recognize that eating leftover meat regularly can leave room for rationalization and bad habit forming. My wife is a vegan. Eating meat is equivalent to cannibalism to her, as all sentient life is considered equally worthy of respect. I'll let others figure out if she's okay with eating leftovers. Sounds like she's not. Then another thread on the Reddit website, the original post is Ethical Vegetarians. Is it okay to eat meat that will otherwise be thrown away? If you do not eat meat because you believe it's wrong to injure or kill animals, do or would you eat meat that would otherwise be thrown away? If you do or would, in what circumstances is this acceptable? Why? And the highlighted reply that I have here is, my decision to not eat meat is to reduce the demand for meat and hopefully be an example for others who want to reduce their demand for meat. It is effectively a boycott. People that make meat alternatives get my money, while those who harm animals do not. If meat is being thrown away, I am not creating any demand for meat, not giving money to those that harm animals, but also not giving money to the people that make meat substitutes. It is not preferable to eat meat that is being thrown away, but it is a boycott, not a poison. And again, another Reddit thread. The original post is only eating meat that would have been thrown out / wasted, sort of asking about what are the ethics of this. They have a few highlighted replies. First one is, obviously, more ethical than purchasing meat to eat, but I'm sure as a matter of principle, most vegetarians would not eat it. As far as principles go, I would, but I do not really want to. I like the taste and all, and as far as I can remember, but the thought of where it comes from makes it disgusting. I would try giving it away if that's a possibility. If it's not, I'll see if my cat will eat it. It's probably good for her anyway. This next reference is from theveganscholar.com. A vegan moral dilemma. Should we eat non-vegan food if it'll otherwise be thrown away? From the part that I have highlighted, I'll start from there. If a non-vegan food product is just going to be thrown away, would it not be better if someone ate it? And If no one is around to eat it except you, should you eat it? Would that mean you're not a vegan anymore? The same applies to other non-vegan products, such as wool blankets and leather shoes. If you have owned these products all of your life and they have already been paid for, is there any sense in throwing them away once you become vegan? Does it make any difference if you wear them or not? Wastefulness is an enormous issue in today's world, and its effect on the environment has been described as catastrophic. To me, veganism goes beyond denying the commodity status of animals. It also extends to the environment and other humans. To me, it is a philosophy of all-around compassion and care. That's why I think it's important for vegans to think deeply about their own environmental impact and consider ways to reduce it. I would use the description of the sort of blood imprint or something to that effect that Mendham coined. I ask myself, why should I buy more food, creating demand for more production, when there's plenty that's already been made going to waste? I've noticed two main perspectives on this issue, and I'm still not entirely sure where I stand, but my opinion does tend to lean towards one side. On one hand, most vegans think it's morally wrong to be wasteful. We should not throw away anything when it could be used by somebody. On the other hand, vegans also believe it's morally wrong to use and exploit animals for our own benefit. This applies to eating and wearing animal products as well as using them in any other way. When we use animal products, especially in front of other people, we actively promote the idea that it's okay to use animals for our own benefit. This is one of the most common arguments I've seen coming from people who think it's better to throw away a non-vegan product than to eat it. That is sensible. Others think human usage is just as bad as human wastage, i.e. humans have no right to use animal products, therefore it's just as bad for them to use them as it is for them to throw them away. And then there's a graphic here on this page. What's worse, using a non-vegan product or letting it go to a landfill? So, who is correct? Is using animal products worse than throwing them away? Or is it the other way around? Is there any middle ground? Or is it a black or white question? Personally, I have not found my side of the fence yet, but I do tend to lean towards the idea that wastage is very, very bad. And because of this, it is better to use an animal product than to waste it. Of course, there are plenty of other ways to use the product other than consuming it yourself. If there is a way to give the product back to animals or to someone who really needs it, I think it's the best to choose that option. Of course, other vegans will disagree with me. Other vegans don't like wastefulness, but to them, animal product use is just as bad. They have every right to this opinion, and I can totally understand their point of view. My veganism is based around the concept of supply and demand. Whether we eat an animal product or throw it away, the result will be the same. The animal has already suffered and their product has already been paid for. If you eat the otherwise wasted animal product, you will not be giving money to the animal product industries. In that sense, it'll make no difference at all. So, in essence, to decide whether or not to eat the product, you must take your personal and moral boundaries into account. In terms of eating meat that'll otherwise go to waste, I do not think I could do it. Meat is disgusting to me, and the 2 occasions I accidentally ate it resulted in persistent vomiting. To me, flesh is not food. I will not put my body through harm to avoid wastage, but I would probably be okay with something containing small amounts of dairy, egg, honey, wool, and so on. Maybe. As I said, I'm not quite sure yet. I can't understand where opponents of this idea are coming from. If we use an animal product in front of another person, regardless of our waste avoidance, we might give the impression that it's okay to use animals. This, obviously, is not an ideology vegans want to promote. But what if no one else is around to see you use the product? Personally, I'm not certain how I feel about that, and I'll need to do some more research. I would see that circumstances, obviously, at that point, there is no negative consequence to then eating it, instead of wasting it when no one else would be around to be influenced into having an impression that it's okay to do it in the future for them, and to actually purchase it themselves, and therefore create more of a demand for the supply of more torture-produced meat, so to speak. In summary, I think I would rather use an animal product than let it go to waste, but I'm going to keep researching the issue until I'm 100% certain of what's right. I might change my mind. I should add that all of that is only my opinion and that it does not reflect on the beliefs of all vegans. Choose your own path and decide what is right for you, as long as you do not judge other vegans who think differently. Remember, we are all in this together. And then this is from Kiora, I believe is how you pronounce the website. Should a vegetarian and vegan eat animal products if they will be thrown away if they do not? Highlighted reply I have is, it is extremely rare for any animal product produced for commercial purposes to be thrown away. I find that to be dubious. I am unconvinced of that, but anyhow. Animal agriculture and related industries are all about the money and profit maximization. Virtually every bit of an animal's corpse can be turned into dollar signs for an exploiter. That's not to account for personal consumption in terms of when someone buys things from the grocery store and they bring it to their house and they throw it away at their garbage, which happens on a wide scale, I would be confident to state. Virtually every bit of an animal's corpse can be turned into dollar signs for an exploiter. There is no such thing as waste. Definitely not true. There's no such thing as waste. If something is nearing an unfit for human consumption date, for example, it will just be sold off to be used in pet food. Glues, etc. are also made from animal waste products. What happens in the home situation where someone has gone vegan/vegetarian and has meat or animal foodstuffs purchased previously? My opinion is that it is best to try to give that foodstuff to non-vegans or feed it to carnivorous animals. The seller has already earned his profit, so you really are not achieving anything by just throwing it away, except maybe denying a possibly starving being a meal for a day. Non-food items are more tricky. Once again, you would be likely to have clothes items that contain animal products. In my opinion, if you choose to still wear these items, that is fine by me. Veganism has to be affordable to garner mass appeal. If you suddenly need to buy a new wardrobe just because of a desire to go vegan, it would hamper a lot of people from turning vegan. There is an argument that says non-vegans will consider you a hypocrite if you still wear animal products, but really, haters are gonna hate anyway. Obviously, going forward, you should not buy clothing items containing animal products. That's a given. Okay, the other highlighted reply from this reference is, I'm not vegan or vegetarian. Nonetheless, there are things I do not eat. I do not eat horse, camel, pig, mollusk, crustacean, and a variety of other things. Whether any of these things will be killed and their parts thrown away has nothing to do with whether I will eat them. What other people do has no influence on what I eat. At least that they're aware of. I would argue subconsciously that probably is arguable. That concludes this video. I know it's been very long. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt that you do actually want to understand. I decided to invest the time to explain. Thank you if you've come through this far and actually have viewed the entire video. Do a video response or leave some comments here if you have anything significant that this has changed your mind on or that you're still confused on. Until next time.